Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. And in today's video, we'll be doing Packet Tracer 11.7.5 for the Cisco Networking Academy. As you can see, completion is at 0%. My goal is to get you to 100% by the end of the video. So as you can see, we have our addressing table, our objectives, scenario, instructions, and basically our steps. So because our packet tracers are starting to get harder, you will realize that on your addressing table, you basically have nothing. You just have your device, your interface, IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway. And your IP address, your subnet mask, and default gateway are all empty. So the first thing we're going to find is try to find our subnet mask, our IP address, and default gateway. As you can see, we have 25 hosts and we have a starting address of 192.168.100.0. Okay, so that's where basically you will be able to begin. Also, if you keep scrolling, they give you a table like this. I'm going to be using this table today to explain on how to get your network addresses, because in this packet tracer, they want you to use this table in order for you to determine your network addresses. So you have to use bits. So I'm just going to go on my Excel so we can do this together. And now if you have watched my previous video, I have already helped you on how to do the calculation for your last octet, number of subnets, number of hosts, and eventually your subnet mask. So in the packet tracer, we saw that we only had 25 hosts, and I always say that pick the closest highest number to the number of hosts you have. So in this case, we would have 30, therefore our subnet mask would be 255.255.255.224. That's going to be our sub. Let me just write it down for you. This will be our subnet mask for everything, all our network addresses. This will be the subnet mask. So 255, and 224. If you're a bit confused, you can just refer on to my previous videos, but that's basically how you find your subnet mask in this case. Now, because we are using bits, let me just move for you. We have a table like this, and on our network addresses, let me just write the first 3 digits of our network. Okay, so you're gonna have something like this. I did not change anything, I just wrote the first 3 digits, which is what we're given basically in the packet tracer. So because they want you to use bits, what we are going to do in this case is we're gonna count using bits. We're gonna count 0 to 7 by using bits. So just click here and you know if you're using bits in order to find. We're using these numbers on the subnet, okay? So 0, to find the number 0 in bit, it would be basically 000, 000, okay? And if we're to find 1, it would be 001, so 001. If we find 2, it would be 010. By now you should be knowing how to count from 0 up till 7 using bits. I'm just going to skip. Okay, now that we have counted from 0 up till 7 using bits, again focus on bit 7, 6, 5. Every bit 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 will always be just zeros. We're going to leave them as just zeros for now, but 7, 6, 5, you're going to focus on these 3 bits and you're going to count from 0 to 7 using bits. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, like, and so forth. Okay, so now we're looking for the last number onto your IP address, onto your networking address, sorry. So I'm going to do a little calculation for you. So we're going to just name this column last network address, which is last network address. Let me just enlarge this for you. Say 15. Okay, we're going to call it last network address. And because we're only focusing on these three bits being bit 7, bit 6, and bit 5, and remember our base is always 2. So because we're only focusing on these three bits, you're going to have 2 to the power of, we don't have any 1 anywhere, it's just zeros. So this will basically be 0. Okay? And then in the next case, if we have to calculate it, your base would be 2, but this time to the exponent 5 because that's where we have our 1 at bit 5. And if you press enter, you'd have 32. Again, in this case, we have 1 at our 6. Our base again is 2 to the power of 6 because our 1 is right there at 6. Enter, you have 64. And in this case, you'd have your base as 2 again to the power of 6. Now, because we have 1 at bit 6 and 1 at bit 5, you're going to add the 2. So it would be 2 to the power of 6 plus 2 to the power of 5, 96. And you're going to do the same thing for the next one as well, which is 2 to the power of 7, 2 to the power of 7 plus 2 to the power of 5, and 2 to the power of, sorry, put the equal to sign, 2 to the power of 7 plus 2 to the power of 6. You click enter, and now you'd have 2 to the power of 7 plus 2 to the power of 6 plus 2 to the power of 5. You click enter, and you'd have 224. So all these numbers will be your last numbers on your network addresses. So here would have 0. On here we would have 32 for the second subnet. For subnet 2 we would have 64. Subnet 3, sorry. Subnet 3 you'd have 96. Subnet 4 you'd have 128. Subnet 5 you'd have 160. 160, sorry. Subnet 6 you'd have 192. And the last one you'd have 224. 224, like so. So now that you would have had your network addresses, you're going to take them and you're going to copy everything and basically put it here where we could find our range usable and our broadcast address so that we could start filling in the missing addresses. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that. Okay, and then your network address will therefore look like this. Your network addresses would look like this. You'd have your subnets and your network addresses. Then you'd have your broadcast. In order to have our broadcast, we're going to use our network addresses to determine the last number on your broadcast address. So in order to do that, just look at the next line on your network address. You have 32, therefore your broadcast would be one number less than what you have on your next line. So because you have 32 on your next line, on your broadcast you just have 31. And here you would have 63 because it is the number before 64, right? And you look on your next line, you have 96. Therefore here you will have 95. In this case you have 128, which means here you'd have 127, again, if you look at the next number in the next line, you have 160, which means you'd have 159. Look at the next number again, you have 192, therefore here you'd have 191. And you have 224, then which means this will be 223. And basically your last number would be 255, because remember that's where we end when we have 8 bits of just ones. Our numbers do not exceed 255. So 255 would basically be your last number. Okay, so now we're going to use our network address and broadcast address to find our range usable IPs. Our range usable IPs again are the numbers we use in our IP addresses for our devices. Okay, so our range would be in the middle of our network address and our broadcast address. Middle being that, which means our beginning for the range usable would be 192.168.100.1. Okay, it has to be between network address and broadcast address, and our range will therefore end at 192.168.100.30, because it has to be between network address and broadcast. And these numbers lie between 0 and 31, which is basically from 1 up till 30. Those are the numbers that lie between. So if you go on the next line, your range usable would be 192.168.100.33, and your range would end at 192.168.100. Again, look at the last number here is 63, therefore our last number would be 62, because again it has to be in between. Again, here the numbers in between would be from 65 up until 94. Again, look at just the last number, the fourth number of your IP address. So it would be from 65 up until 94. You may pause the video and see if this is something you can do on your own. Right up till 192.168.194. You can pause the video and see if this is something you can do on your own, and then unpause once you are done to see if you have got it correct. 197, 192.168.100.126, 126, sorry, because again it has to be in between. Now please be careful as you keep going, because these can be very confusing and it's easy to make a mistake. And once you have one thing wrong, almost everything else is going to be wrong. So you're going to have to restart. So just be careful as you keep going. 129. 100 and 158. I'm just going to finish the rest and come back. Okay, so when you're done, this is how it should look. Your range usable IPs should look something like this. It should look exactly like this actually. So now that we're done, we've found our network addresses, our ranges, and our broadcast address. So basically what now we have to do is move on to here where we have our device interface IP address. Basically we just have to fill in our addressing table. So we're going to go back into the packet tracer and read where does which IP address go. Okay, so let me scroll down. And when they say assign the subnets to the network shown in the topology, assign subnet 0 to LAN connected to gigabit Ethernet 00 interface of R1. So we go back, and basically they tell us to look at subnet 0. So for gigabit Ethernet for gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1, we're going to be looking at subnet 0. Okay, we got that part covered. And then they say assign subnet 1 to LAN connected to gigabit Ethernet 01 interface to R1. So again, go back, and when we're looking at subnet 1, it's gigabit Ethernet 01 of R1. Go back to your packet tracer for next instruction, and then they say assign subnet 2 to LAN connected to gigabit Ethernet 00 interface of R1, and assign subnet 3 LAN connected to gigabit Ethernet 01 interface to R2. So in this case, subnet 2, they said go to gigabit Ethernet 00 of R2. And the third subnet goes to gigabit Ethernet 01 of R2. And then they say assign subnet 4 to one link between R1 to R2. So one link would basically be the S00. They tell us to use subnet 4, sorry. We use the fourth subnet. So going on to the fourth subnet, and this would be the S000 for both R1 and R2. If we go back onto our packet tracer, they then say assign the first usable IP address in each subnet to R1. So the first usable should go to R1, okay, of the two LAN links, which is gigabit Ethernet 00 and gigabit. Okay, so the first usable, again, we're going to be looking at gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1, and we remember we only use the range usable IPs. So the first usable in this case would be 192.168.100.1, and in gigabit Ethernet 01 it would be 192.168.100.33. And again for R2, the first usable would be 192.168.100, and we're looking for the first usable, which would be this. It would be 97. And for gigabit Ethernet 01 would be 192.168.100. We're looking at gigabit Ethernet 01 for R2. Sorry, that was supposed to be 97, which means my gigabit Ethernet 01 is wrong. This is 97. And gigabit Ethernet 00 is supposed to be 65. 65, sorry, my bad, guys. And remember, this is our subnet mask, and this would be our subnet mask for everything. So 255.255.255.224. You may write this if it pleases you, but it's easier to just, because I mean, after all, the IP address for all of these would be ending by 224. But I'm gonna write it down for you so it's easier. That's 255. Okay. Now we go back to our packet tracer. Now that we've used the first usable for R1 and R2, we have to assign the second usable IP address attached subnet to the switches. So the second usable, we're gonna put them onto the switches, and the last usable IP addresses onto the PC in each subnet. So we're going to go back to our calculation, and our switches basically will have the second usable. So here for switch 1, you'd have 192.168.100.2. And this is because the second usable will be from 1, and the second number after 1 would be 2, the following number basically. And remember that if you go back to your packet tracer, you would see that switch 1 is connected to gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1, and switch 2 to gigabit Ethernet 01 of R1 again, and so is switch 3 and switch 4 with R2. So if you go back on your calculation now, because we already have that gigabit Ethernet 00 with R1, we already have them written out for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect them, we're going to find their connection with the switches and find the next usable. So in this case, switch 1, it was directly connected to gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1, hence the second usable is 2. Now if you go to switch 2, it was connected to gigabit Ethernet 01 of R1, which means our second usable would be from the next number of 33, which would basically be 34. So 192.168.100.34. And for switch 3, which was directly connected to gigabit Ethernet 00 of R2, it would be 192.168.100.66 because the first usable was 65. So if we go to the following number, it would be 66, which is the second usable. And we're going to do the same for switch 4, 192.168.100.98. And remember, our subnet mask is 255.255.255.224. Our subnet mask is the same throughout. In this case, 224, 255.255.255.224, 255.255.255.224. Okay. Now, for R1 and R2, you must also remember that they will not have a default gateway. So I'm just going to say NIC for this to show that we won't have a default gateway for R1 and R2. But for the switches and for the PCs, we will have a default gateway. So now that we have that out of the way, now we're going to deal with our PCs. So if you go back onto your packet tracer, they tell you to assign the last usable IP addresses to the PCs in each subnet. So you get back here, and basically in this case we are going to use our last range would be these numbers right here. These are our first and these are our last. Those are the only usable addresses we are going to get. So PC1 is directly linked to gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1. Therefore, we're going to use the last rangeable IP here. The last usable, sorry, which is 192.168.100.30. And for PC2, which is directly linked to gigabit Ethernet 01 of R1, it's 192.168.100, and in this case, the last usable would be 62. So .62. And again, for PC3, it is directly linked to gigabit Ethernet 00 of R2. And our last usable in this case would be 126 here. 192.168.100.126. And the last PC, which is PC4, directly linked to gigabit Ethernet 01 of R2, it's 158, which is right here. So 192.168, sorry, .168, 100 and 158, which is the last usable. And again, our subnet mask will be the same. So 255.255.255.224. Again, 255.255.254. And again, the subnet mask will not change. And same thing for PC4, subnet mask will be the same. Now what we have to do is find our default gateway. In this case, in the packet tracer, they already have our gigabit Ethernet 0001 for R1 and R2, and they show us a direct link. So our default gateway for switch 1 and PC1, if you see, they have a direct connection connected by only one cable. Okay, goes like this. This is gigabit Ethernet 00, and the default gateway for PC1 and switch 1 would be the IP address for gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1. And the same thing for PC2 and switch 2, they will have the same default gateway, and PC3 and switch 3, PC4 and switch 4. So we go back on our calculation and fill that part in, where our default gateway for switch 1 would be gigabit Ethernet 00 of R1. So that our IP address here was 192.168.100.1. And for switch 2, it'll be the same. For switch 1, the default gateway for switch 1 will be the same default gateway as PC1. So let me do that first before I confuse you. 192.168.100.1. Okay, now for switch 2 and PC2, they'll also have the same default gateway, and the default gateway would be 192.168.100, and switch 2 was directly linked to gigabit Ethernet 01 of R1, so which is, there's our IP address, so will be 33, the last number, and the default gateway will also be the same for PC2, so 192.168.100.33. And for switch 3, our default gateway will be the same as gigabit Ethernet 00 of R2. So 192.168.100.65, and the same default gateway will apply for PC3, which is 192.168.100.65. And last, which is switch 4, 192.168.100.97. You can see it right here. There is a direct link, and the default gateway will be the same for PC4, which is 192.168.100.97. That was a lot of work. So we have successfully completed our addressing table. We have completed our addressing table. We filled in our subnet mask, our IP addresses, and our default gateway. So the hard part is over, because the hard part in this packet tracer is normally the calculation and the finding of IP addresses and default gateway, because it can get a little confusing. But now that we got that out of the way, we can then begin filling in our packet tracer. So we have to go to R1, access R1, go onto your CL tab. Let me just move that for you. Click enter. We're going to enable, go into our configuration mode, and we're going to have gigabit Ethernet 00 to start with, and IP address. We go onto our calculation. So because we're dealing with gigabit Ethernet, 00 here, 192.168.100.1. As you can see, here's the IP address, and our subnet mask, which was 255.255.255.224. You enter and no shutdown. Okay, and we exit, and now we have to do our in G00 gigabit Ethernet 01 for our R1. Sorry, in G01, like so, and put in your IP address. Your IP address is right here. So 192.168.100.33, and our subnet mask 255.255.255.224. Enter and no shutdown. Okay, and that's it for our R1. Now that we have fixed R1, we move on to the next. And if you try to click on any of these, even though we have calculated our IP addresses, you'll find that you can't click on R2, see? And you also can't click on switch 1 and switch 2. So we're just going to go straight to switch 3. Go on your CL tab. Let me just top that for you. Enable and go into your configuration mode. And because we're using a switch, we're gonna say int VLAN 1, and we're gonna go back to our calculation to find our IP address for switch 3. So here's switch 3. This is our IP address. So IP address 192.168.100.66, and do not forget your subnet mask 255.255.255.224, and no shutdown. Okay, now on switch 3, we also have a default gateway. So let me just, we have a default gateway for switch 3. So you're going to say IP default gateway. And our IP default gateway for switch 3 was 192.168.100.65. You can go check on that one. There you have it. Now back to our packet tracer. We've completed switch 3. and you'll see that you won't be able to access PC1, PC2, PC3 if you try to click on them, but we will be able to access PC4. Go on your desktop IP configuration. Let me top that for you. So go back on your calculation, and we're looking at PC4, and PC4, sorry, here. I'm sorry, things are so squeezed in. Your IP address for PC4 is 192.168.100.158. Your subnet mask, remember the last digit is 224, and your default gateway, which is right here. So you're gonna have 192.168.100.97. Sorry, 97. Okay, now go back to your packet tracer. Okay, go back to your calculation, and we were dealing with PC4. This is supposed to be 126. 26, yes. And go back to your packet tracer. Yep. So we're done. As you can see, completion is now at 100%. Again, if you're having any sort of problem or you're struggling on any way, just go on check results, assessment items, and you can scroll down here to see where you have gone wrong or what you may have done wrong. So now this was a short activity if you found the IP addresses, because there wasn't much to do. So the hard part or the most work was on your addressing table. So once you can find your addressing table, everything else just goes smoothly. Okay, so as you can see, completion is 100%. Thank you for staying this far. Thank you for watching my video. I'll see you in my next video. Good day and God bless.